Hello and welcome to the Fervent 4. Did you know that only 4% of businesses ever cross the annual $1 million revenue mark? Hello, I'm Zack Miller, author of Anomaly. With me today, I have my co-host Tim Ryan, lead man at StartWheel.org. Thank you so much for joining us. The Fervent 4 is a weekly show each and every Thursday at 11 a.m. dedicated to sharing insights into growing a world-class business. Today, we are joined by a world-class business owner, Dr. Allen Lim of Skratch Labs, who concocted, never used that word before, at least not live on the internet, concocted, try and spell that, not going to try, a very fancy coffee he was telling us about just a moment ago. So you started Skratch Labs some time ago. My first question to you is, though you changed Skratch to a K in there and then also didn't buy the domain skratch.com, or at least I don't think you did. Or maybe you did, but why add the labs in there and not just go by Skratch? And how do you guys play with that?
Yeah, I think for us, the reason why we called the company Skratch Labs is because we wanted to note this contradiction between heart and head, right? And that, we're very much kind of influenced by this great quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald when he says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in one's mind and still retain the ability to function," right? One may realize the situation is hopeless, yet still work to make it better. And for us, all of the products that we made were based on evidence-based problem solving, based on science. But at the same time, there was so much emotion and heart. And I think humanity and the sports world that I came from, or just, being a human being. And we wanted to recognize that everything great has both your heart and your mind, right? That you could effectively be a rational hedonist. So there was this idea from Skratch that, food and drink is better from scratch, but that no matter where you find yourself in life, you can always start from scratch. And there was this acknowledgement with the labs that we could still use our minds, that we could still think, that we could still solve problems. And it was solving problems in a rational, meaningful way with real methodology that brought us to this point.
And in terms of like the origin of Skratch, what was that origin as far as saying, hey, we're gonna make a go at this. This is a passion of mine. How did you get started? What was the mindset when you started the business?
I think in a lot of ways, this was initially an accident and it wasn't initially intentional. I am trained as an exercise physiologist, and I spent, most of my professional career working as a sports scientist on the pro cycling tour. When I was on the pro cycling tour, there were two major problems that I came into. One was the problem of performance enhancing drug use in the sport. And there was a real epidemic at the time where athletes had this, I think, false belief that just because something was called performance enhancing, or just because it was a pharmaceutical, that it somehow made your body better than the, process of training, resting, sleeping, doing everything you could to become a better athlete. At the same time, training systems were bad, nutrition was bad, all of these kind of fundamentals were bad. So when I came into the sport, I ended up helping to write a grant to the World Anti-Doping Agency that proposed that we could begin to look for changes in biology as opposed to drugs themselves to catch people who might be using performance enhancing drugs. So, for example, instead of looking for something like human growth hormone, you would take a jaw x-ray. And if the human jawline changed from year to year, the only way that might happen in an adult is if they were taking a drug like HGH. If someone did a blood transfusion, we could look at the ratio of, say, adult red blood cells to reticulocytes or immature or baby red blood cells. And if there were too many adults compared to kids, you knew that something was manipulated. That began to really meaningfully change the sport, at least internally. At the same time, there was still this issue of, athletes complaining that their sports drink, was making them feel sick and just wasn't helping their performance, or that, these dry energy bars were also making them sick and not pleasant to eat, etc. So I started literally roaming the world tour with this rice cooker, making little sushi rice cakes, and a little blender blending my own drink mixes. And then I started building out food trucks and hiring world-class chefs. And we really started to double down on the quality of food, nutrition, athlete care. Effectively, I kind of swapped my lab coat for an apron, fundamentally realizing that there was this real need for just human care at that level of sport that these athletes weren't getting, which also included making better food from scratch. Eventually, all of that work led to some great success. I was coaching a team called Garmin. I had 3 riders, 2 in the top 10 and 1 who was breaking the top 10. And this was a year when Lance Armstrong decided to come back. And the athletes I worked with, who were these world-class athletes who had committed to riding and racing the Tour clean, were on par with athletes who, maybe had not viewed the sport in the same way. And I think there was this real kind of head scratcher going on. And one of those guys who was scratching his head was Lance. And after that race, Lance approached me, the 2009 Tour de France, approached me to ask me if I would work with him, coach him. And for me, I think I was always really frightened of Lance and really scared of him. I kind of saw him as centerpiece of what was kind of wrong in terms of ambition and sport, and was fairly intimidated by him, but also had this belief that I was doing work to fight Lance, that he was kind of Darth Vader, and that we were, Luke Skywalker, if you will, this kind of good versus bad narrative. But as I started getting into conversation with him, I realized that, let's say he is the centerpiece of all that is wrong in the doping world. But that if I had this belief in anti-doping, could I forgive him, and could I work with him to make things better? Could he still have the most influence over the sport? And if he could do 1 Tour de France clean, would that change the whole entire ecosystem of the way that sport works? And so maybe there was, a lot of naivete in that, but maybe there was also some commitment to giving people a shot and really, really proving to the world that a clean sport could work. Long story short, I ended up deciding to work with him, but then the federal investigation on Lance started, and I got embroiled in all of that. And it really sucked. I mean, I spent my whole entire career just trying to help make things better. I decided to, help this guy. It was kind of a point of like, wow, for people who didn't know about the sport, it was a big deal because now I'm associated with the best athlete in that sport. But internally, it was also pretty controversial, right? Because of the work that I had done, and people had thought that I had sold out. So it was complicated, right? And there was no easy way to explain my situation to folks. I got embroiled in that investigation, came home from the 2010 Tour de France, and waiting for me at home were a cadre of federal investigators, right? And
just like the movies?
Just like the movies.
Wow.
And it took a while for me to kind of clear my own name in all of this. And in that process, I found that it was really easy for people to shun you. It was really easy for people to just cast you out and say, well, you're the one to blame, and you're, part of all the evil, and I'm going to use you as a scapegoat. And
the internet doesn't make that easier too, right? So like if you just search your name, I mean, it's still there pretty high up there. And it's like, wow, I didn't know any of these things about you until I started researching. I'm just like, look, like whatever, like I care about Skratch, Allen. Like let's that's it. But the point is like, because of the internet, like a lot of that stuff is going to live forever, I guess.
Yeah, and anyone's opinion about you in a moment is going to live forever, however that opinion is crafted or made. And in a world full of conspiracy theories, I like to joke that I am at the center of every major conspiracy in the world right now. If you connect all the dots on the internet, sorry guys, I'm going to let it happen.
Do you have a conspiracy theory hat? Because if you don't,
my gosh, yeah.
You do?
I mean, that's a great idea, right?
Well, there you go.
And it's funny because I have met a lot of people who have left a lot of nasty comments on the internets about me, and I've met people who have come up and said, yeah, I was just really angry at the time. And I just made this nasty comment about you because I didn't know who else to blame. And I'm sorry. And I'm like, well, you want to go and delete that comment? And they're like, I'm sorry, I can't. It's there forever. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But it's interesting because I have really good friends who, were born out of that conflict and born out of that, maybe angry, that anger and that vitriol. And, I found myself, just trying to figure out what I was going to do next in my life. And I realized that no matter how much I cared about trying to help take care of other people, if I didn't find a way to take care of myself, it didn't really matter. And there was an athlete who I had formerly coached named Ian McGregor, who really cared about me and, was one of the few guys who just didn't abandon me. And he had been injured as an athlete and had begun working for me on different projects when I worked for Lance. And, he stuck by me and we started thinking and talking about the things that we could do with our lives. He was in school for mechanical engineering at School of Mines. And these athletes I had formerly worked with during this time were still calling me and saying, hey, I know you're in a world of hurt, but can you send us a batch of that drink mix? Can you share with us the recipes that you made for us while we were on tour? And initially I was kind of, irritated by it, but then I was like, I'm not doing anything and they're still my friends. So Ian and I would make up these small batches in a blender and send them off to our friends. And then eventually more and more folks started asking for this stuff. And so we started making bigger batches in these food safe paint buckets. There's a local hardware store in Boulder, Colorado called McGuckin Hardware. And if you buy a branded McGuckin Hardware bucket, they give you a lifetime of free shaking. So we would pre-fill these buckets with all of the ingredients for the drink mix. And then we would go to the hardware store and these dudes in green McGuckin vests would shake the stuff for us.
Is it like a painter, like a thing of paint? Like how big is the bucket?
The bucket is about a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big bucket, but it's a plastic food safe bucket. And you can shake either sports drink in it or you can shake paint in it. And these guys didn't care or know. They just knew that we came in with a McGuckin Hardware bucket. And we would show up and they put it in their paint shaker and we had golf balls mixed in there with it so that we could get a homogeneous mix. And
is that why shaker bottles have those little things in them?
Yeah, it's to help break up the particles. It's help to move things around. And that's how we were making this stuff. And we were just largely sending this to our friends who were on the
Are you stuck at your home office, socially distanced coffee shop, or your fancy all bricked out corner office wondering why no one can see your business and sales are all over the place? Sounds like you need a pro. That's why I developed the Anomaly Academy. Insert clever copy here. Oh, I guess I was supposed to put something else there. Oops. You can grab access to the Anomaly Academy now at zackmillersays.com/Anomaly Academy.